morning, good afternoon, or good evening. And you know who this is if that's the introduction. Trish Lambert here with the Silmarillion Film Project, filling in for Dave, who is doing bedtime duty. He will be with us, but just not right here at the beginning.
Unless
But
his
is
children
with
get the
us.
better of him, which,
That's right.
happens. I can tell
Which
you,
could happen. That's right. Which could happen.
I can remember many the evening doing bedtime duty when in the end my only recourse was to go to sleep myself as a way to induce my children to go to sleep. So,
That's
sometimes
right. That's right.
sometimes you got to pull out the stops.
So that voice there, and the only thing we're actually seeing on screen at the moment is Corey Olson, the Tolkien professor, who I'm assuming you. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
All right.
We have slides.
We have
too.
other things to look at besides Corey. Okay, good. All right. Well, yeah. So what are we doing tonight? We're actually looking at the whole season now, right? We've worked
That's
through.
it. Yeah. Overview. So
Story.
we're gonna do. We've pretty much talked through almost. There's actually one little tidbit that's which we can cover just at the very beginning. But anyway, yeah. So we're done with our kind of brainstorming mode, and now we're trying to put it together and make sure that we can fit it into sequences that are going to make sense and think through how we will present the whole season in our 13 episodes. So yeah, big overview stuff tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun. Absolutely. So
Yeah.
But before I get going tonight, let me go back, because of course it is our fall fundraising campaign, raising funds for the annual fund 2020, our fiscal year 21 annual fund. Many thanks to everybody who has donated so far. We've been doing very well this year. We've raised about $55,000, which is wonderful. I remember when that was way more than we raised for the whole year before. Back in the old days when we were like, let's shoot for 30,000 this year. But anyway, it's just wonderful. We're involved now in the accreditation process. We are preparing to send off our second check to the accreditors as we continue through the process. So, things are moving along, expenses coming in. So this is what we're raising money to help cover. And of course, in the context of the fundraising campaign this year, I've been talking about issues in higher education. I've been talking about, because there's so many ways in which I've been watching higher education struggle, institution of higher education having serious problems, not just this year. I mean, this crisis of 2020 has been, really what has kind of thrown this over the boundary to being really, really critical, such that I really kind of can't keep it to myself anymore. But a lot of these are problems that I've been observing for a really long time. And of course, many of these problems that I've been talking about over the last few weeks are problems that Signum was deliberately designed to circumvent. Some are things that we, kind of have ended up circumventing kind of incidentally along the way. But I want to be sharing about, many of these problems that higher education is facing and the ways in which Signum has basically overcome them, and the way in which our model is really kind of clearing these hurdles as we move towards the future. So tonight is problem number 8. Problem number 8 in higher education. It's the third that I've talked about this week during my broadcasts, and my theme this week has been behind-the-scenes problems. These are not like the headliner problems that everybody talks about. These are not the things that tend to make headlines and stuff like that. These are operational challenges for higher education behind the scenes, as I say. I talked on Tuesday about the problem of top-heavy administrations in higher education and what a huge problem that is. And how much money, of course, is invested in this upper echelon of professional administrators in universities and the difficulties that has kind of created. Last night, I was talking about the very, very old, so that's a new problem that is new within the last, couple decades, which in the life of higher education is very, very recent. The problem I talked about last night was one that is centuries old. actually has its roots going back way back, and that is the sort of caste divide between faculty and staff, the division between faculty and staff, and the way in which faculty and staff are treated completely differently. There is this deep and fundamental inequity among the employee panel of all universities, and it's I think insupportable for the future. It's just not a tolerable situation moving forward. So I talked a little bit about how Signum has set itself to eliminate that inequity from the whole structure of what we do. The third problem, the one I want to talk about today, is a problem which has only really been a major issue here over the last few months, but is, I think, going to be an issue that is going to be a challenge for the future. And that is distributed operations. That is to say, people working from home, right? Now, this, of course, people working from home is one of the biggest changes. One of the major things that's been happening, of course, in almost everybody's life here over the course of 2020. It's also, I think, one of the most likely to be permanent changes. Of all of the things that have happened, all of the ways in which our society has changed over the last, 5-6 months, the one that I think is going to be most enduring is going to be this trend of people working from home. I think that the corporate workplace, will never be the same again. I don't know if this is a completely accurate metaphor, Trish. I don't know what you think about this, but the whole distributed operations, people working from home thing, and corporate America, to me, it kind of seems like it's almost like maybe like a 7-year-old who doesn't want to get in the pool because it's cold, right? Like the pool is cooked, it's a hot day and the pool feels really cold. So they're standing there on the steps like, oh no, I can't, no, I'm afraid to go. And then somebody just comes in and pushes them, right? And they go in and they're like, I'm going to drown. And then they're like, actually the water's really nice. And then you can't get them out of the pool afterwards. To me, that's like corporate America and working from home, right? I mean, so many major corporations were like, we are not, a year ago, had been like, we will never do that. That is not how we operate, and we can't.
There's no way to. We'll lose productivity. People will
absolutely. It just can't be done. We cannot countenance this kind of thing. And then, or
the technology, right? Oh, we don't have the technology, and all of a sudden, boom.
Right, boom, exactly. So it was one of the things that was interesting to watch, over the last 5-6 months, that all of the people who had been saying, like, this will not work, it will never work, it's foolish to do this, it can't, are now like, well, now you have to show that you can make it work or else you're going to go under, aren't you? So they had to completely reverse themselves. But again, what a lot of people have discovered, what a lot of companies have discovered is, hey, actually, this works pretty well, doesn't it? It's not so bad. Yeah, the water's fine, actually. And again, I'm not saying that I think everything is going to stay exactly like it is now forever. I'm not saying that at all, but I think it will never be exactly the same again. And I think that, people working from home is going to be a fixture of, the workplace from now on. As I said, whatever happens, the workplace will never be the same again. Now, there are a lot of challenges here. Of course, obviously, I do support people working from home. Signum has been a completely distributed organization from day one. So yeah, I do believe that you can run an organization with people working out of their homes. But there are challenges, especially challenges when you're first converting to it, right? When you're first trying to make it work. Like remote learning, right? Like teaching online, you can't just try to do everything the same that you always done it, just online instead of in person. It doesn't work that way. You've got to think a bunch of things through. There are a lot of things within how corporations function that are premised on assumptions based on the physical environment that companies have generally operated on. Things like management structures, patterns of communication, how workers are held accountable for the work that they do, operational habits. That is, like, somebody goes down the hall and calls a meeting, and says, like, okay, everybody come down to the meeting room. We're going to talk about this. Like, if that's the normal way you do business, well, that might not work exactly the same way when everybody's working from home. So some adjustments are going to need to be made there. Again, so some of these things translate. You can do a lot of these things really well, online, when people are in home and in different area codes and things. Many of these things don't. And there's a pattern. I mean, I can tell you from when Signum began doing this, you kind of start off when you first begin doing it by just trying to emulate things, like trying to parallel all of your normal functions and operations, except you're doing it online, right? And then eventually, as you're going through, you're like, hey, actually, this is not anymore very efficient, right? It was okay when we were all in a building together, but that's not the best way to operate now. And so you begin to find new and better ways. You adapt, and you take advantage. You not only learn to sort of overcome some of the challenges of operating in a distributed manner, but you begin to take advantage of the unique opportunities that provides you, that things that you can do well that you can't do well when you're all working in a building. It's a process. Now, higher education in particular faces some challenges here, right? In the short term, the challenge that they're facing is that they have to adapt. There are a lot of places that are operating remotely. There's and even campuses where people are back on campus, they're still a lot of places still trying to limit contact, right? Still trying to limit on-campus populations and density of populations in buildings. So there's a lot of short-term adaptation that needs to happen, and swift adaptation to changing circumstances, not exactly the traditional strength of higher education. So this is it's a challenge. And that challenge, of course, they share with many, many other people. But I think in the longer term, there are some more significant challenges that higher education is going to face, which are not necessarily unique to them, but are very strong with them. In particular, as I say, I think that there's going to be a lot of ways in which the workplace in America is going to be changing. And I think that one of the things that many companies are going to find is, gosh, actually, we could increase our profit margin if we decreased our real estate, right? I mean, if we were spending less on this huge office building, if we were even just had office space a third the size of our current office space, we could save an enormous amount of money, and that would be a great deal more efficient. And so I think we're going to see a lot of businesses downsizing their physical space because they're not going to need all that physical space, because a lot of people are going to be working from home. So they can do that. Many businesses are going to be able to do that. Higher education, well, that's going to be harder, right? Because higher education, one of the things that makes most that is brick and mortar higher education differ from other corporate organizations, is that their identities are kind of wrapped up in their buildings, right? There are going to be very few campuses that are going to be like, okay, so now we have a bunch of people working from home, so let's sell off a third of the campus. Yeah, it's unlikely. It could happen in some places, but I think it's unlikely. They're not going to be able to downsize. Again, they're invested in that space, in those buildings. And so it's going to be hard. It's going to be much harder for them to, I say the workplace will never be the same, except the physical workplace on university campuses isn't going anywhere, right? And so how are they going to do? How are they going to adapt? Are they going to just, refuse to let anybody work from home because they've got to use their offices that they have, because they have to use the space that they've got? It's and then meanwhile, everybody else is going to be getting more efficient, and they're going to continue having the same high cost problems that they've been having, which has been contributing to many of their problems all along. It's going to be a struggle. It's going to be a real struggle for them to adapt to a future in which a greater percentage of folks across industries are working digitally, are going to be expecting to work digitally. How are they going to compete for people, even in a sense, in the open job market? It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. Signum, of course, we've been through this process, right? We've been completely distributed from day one. We have faculty, staff, and as well as our students all over the country and the world. And this, I think, is one of the things that makes us much more agile and adaptable than most universities. We don't have that kind of ponderous, Marie, as you say, glacial pace of change that is so common in higher education. We change pretty quickly and pretty regularly because from the beginning we've known, like our whole existence has been an adventure, right? And that's kind of the attitude with which we approach things. We don't have this is how we've done things for the last 150 years. We don't have anything like that at Signum. But it's not just that we don't have longstanding traditions. It's that we have our most well-established tradition is, being prepared to reinvent ourselves if we see better ways to do it, if we can find ways that we can improve our operations and do things better. This kind of evolution and growth is how we roll, and that kind of flexibility, it's going to be crucial to success in the 21st century. Whatever happens, however long it takes, and whatever happens with the pandemic over the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, I don't know, but it's going to there's more agility, more ability to change and adapt is going to be really essential. And this is one of the elements that I think is going to be in which higher education is going to be very deeply challenged to adapt. So anyway, so that is problem number 8 that I wanted to address today. All right. And again, thanks to everyone who donates and supports Signum. And if you haven't yet, I certainly hope that you will consider doing so. SignumUniversity.org/fund is our website there, where you can read all about the annual fund and about our donor reward program and all the things that we're doing to help to keep programs like this running, but also, of course, our the bigger things. We are Signum is really in this year stepping forward and working to take its place in the wider field of higher education, because we can't keep ourselves to ourselves anymore. We can see all the problems that higher education is facing, and I'm not saying we have like the only solutions to those, but we don't have the problems that other higher education institutions have. Our model is, by chance, if chance you call it, uniquely adapted to the world that has suddenly come upon us here in 2020. And we want to share that with people. We want to help folks. We want to help students, and we want to even help other institutions to see how they can adapt to this world. So that's what we're sharing this year. But all right, let's get back to film here. So the first thing, before I even go to the first slide, because the first slide is the first of our beautiful rainbow colored slides, and I don't want to get distracted by that, because I want to touch on the one subject we didn't get to last time, which is Huan. This was an issue that was raised, I think, by Huan on the discussion boards. Marie will correct me if I'm wrong about that. We need to have there's a clear sense in the Baron and Luthien story when Huan and his destiny, that is that he will not be slain except by the greatest wolf who ever lived. That's well known. Like it's a commonly known across Beleriand sort of thing. How does that happen? So it is absolutely correct. We have to put that out there now so that it's, everybody knows that by season 6 when we get around to that. So okay, great. Yeah, and Florian has also expressed a lot of interest in this. Yeah, Florian, really appreciate all your contributions. Actually, your addition to our team here, and also your discussions elsewhere have been really valuable. So there were some suggestions about sort of this being overheard and stuff. Here's my impulse. I don't know exactly the mechanics of this, but let's see if we can kind of talk it through. My impulse here. My impulse is to make Huan, the Huan prophecy, sort of parallel to. I want to make it Glorfindel-like, right? Just as Glorfindel makes the prophecy about the downfall of the Witch King, right? I kind of want a similar sort of deal for Huan. And I'm thinking of similar kinds of circumstances. That is, like, a foretelling comes upon someone at some point concerning Huan, right? And they make the pronouncement, right? They state the thing that they are foretelling, they're foreseeing, and it's overheard by many, right? And I think because one of the questions was like, how do the bad guys find out about this? Because the bad guys need to find out about this because Morgoth needs to start, like, the Wolf Project, right? He's got to get, got to devote, a room in his R&D wing to, like, generating the greatest wolf who's ever lived, right? So we can, right. And Stephen, exactly. Sauron also attempts to fulfill the prophecy. Exactly. So clearly the bad guys need to know about this. I absolutely agree. So there were some suggestions about, like ways in which Thuringwethil, for instance, could overhear people talking about it. And we could do that. But I think it would be cooler for it to be a public pronouncement, for this to be a pronouncement overheard, because it's not like sort of meant to be a secret, right? It can be so like it can be something which perhaps might have been better if the bad guys didn't find out about it. But again, it's one of those moments where a foretelling comes upon someone and they decree it in the hearing of many people, and they don't, it's not like strategic and everything like that. All we would need for something like that is an occasion. I'm thinking about battle. Is there some kind of skirmish? What about the Battle of the Stockade? Could Huan be... Because, I mean, Caranthir comes down at the end to help, and he's the one who speaks. All we'd have to do is get Celegorm involved as well. Caranthir would still be in charge, right? Caranthir always thinks he's in charge. So Caranthir would still be the spokesperson, and he would still be the one who'd be approaching Haleth, and he would still be the one to whom she's saying, like, no, thank you, jerk. But if Celegorm and Huan were there, so again, the circumstance that I'm thinking of, so forgetting the particular battle for now, what I'm thinking of is, like, on the battlefield, Huan does something awesome, right, on the battlefield, and someone just has to make a comment about, like, how awesome Huan is, and, like, either they can be, like, expressing concern for him, or even just saying, like, gosh, it's Celegorm, it sure is a blessing that you have Huan at your side, and then somebody has the foretelling come upon them and say, yea, indeed, none but the greatest wolf, none shall ever slay Huan but the greatest wolf who ever lived. Like, somebody just has to have the prophetic impulse, right? It just comes across, like it seems to come across Glorfindel at that moment with the Witch King, right? He didn't, like, draw that up, he didn't premeditate that. He just, like, in that moment decrees it, right? Anyway, yeah, I'm thinking an occasion like that, and again, it's spontaneous and it's on the battlefield, so there are bad guys there, right? So we just need somebody reliable, probably not just random red shirt orcs. Bulldog, maybe somebody, I don't know, but anyway, somebody who's there on the battlefield and hears the prophecy given, and takes it seriously, which again, that doesn't seem entirely impossible or unlikely, and brings it back to Sauron or directly to Morgoth or whatever. Both of them clearly need to know about it. So I say battle. I don't mean, it doesn't have to be a big battle, like some kind of action, right? Some kind of, that's kind of what I'm thinking in. Rhiannon asks, could it be during the escape attempt from Angband? Sure. Yeah. No, I don't have any particular investment in where it is. I mean, obviously it has to be somewhere where Celegorm and Huan could be brought in without too much contortion, essentially. But yeah, no, I mean, wherever you guys think is best, if you can see a really fun Huan roll, I mean, ideally it would be right after a time when Huan has just like done something important, right? So that he has become for the moment the topic of conversation among people, right? And that's when, as they are considering Huan and who he is and where he comes from and his value and stuff, that this vision of his destiny, you know, comes upon the person and they just out with it, right? Now, yeah, yeah. Nick is saying, could it be overheard after the skirmish rather than during, like when speech might be audible? No, I don't mean like in the din of battle exactly, because yeah, that'd be kind of hard to overhear. You could maybe do that in a Shakespeare play, but it's kind of hard to do that anywhere else, right? Yeah, no, it's fine, but again, the challenge is, one of the reasons I was thinking about a battle, so there are two reasons I was thinking of a battlefield for this. I was thinking prophecy, like that kind of foresight, because I think that's, I mean, clearly that kind of foresight is going to be, I mean, it is a prophecy about him, right? So somebody has to have it at some point. And so it might as well be the most efficient thing for us to do is to have the prophetic declaration be overheard itself, right? Rather than they make it in private and then we have to have other people like saying, hey, dude, did you hear the prophecy about Huan, and have that conversation overheard? It's just a little less efficient, right? And it's a little bit cooler. It's a little bit more dramatic, too, for the original prophecy to be overheard by somebody among the bad guys who is really impacted by it, who's like, whoa, that dog is bad news. Okay, so Maria's asking, am I wanting Celegorm to have the prophetic impulse? Not necessarily, no. No, it doesn't have to be Celegorm. I think it could be somebody completely different. Rhiannon wants to know if it could be Finrod. I'd have no problem with it being Finrod. Finrod seems to me a good candidate. I mean, almost any elf lord is a candidate for, you know, prophetic insight. It doesn't have to be one of the major characters, but I think it absolutely could. It's going to depend on the circumstance. I mean, obviously, a lot of it's going to depend on the circumstances of where it happens and when it is, right? So, I mean, if it's up in the north during the escape attempt from Angband, maybe this involves, you know, Fingon, and, you know, so like maybe Fingon makes it. I don't know. If it's going to be over, like, again, maybe it's somewhere around the action surrounding the stockade battle and the driving off of the orcs who came in for the stockade battle. That's at least over, that takes place, you know, in the greater Feanorian realm area, right? So again, I can imagine geographically getting him there. Marie says it needs to be an elf. Yeah, I think it does, or else people aren't going to take it as seriously. Like, if some random human says it, is like, even if Sauron himself overheard, is he going to take that seriously? I don't know. You know, I kind of think it has to be an elf. I kind of do. Yeah. Yeah, Florian says, I think Huan should already at least kind of know, since he fell under the doom of the Noldor, but he doesn't have to talk about it to Celegorm. Yeah, I think Huan should not be surprised by this. Like, he doesn't talk often, um, and not at all yet. So he is, he can't be the one to declare it. He's not going to share this his own self. But I think that we can sort of show, I mean, I think it'd be even cool. And Marie, I think this is one of the reasons why I was kind of thinking of it not being Celegorm, is that when the prophecy is declared, Huan's response, like, he responds to it with a sort of confirmation, right? Not like a cheesy, like, wagging and barking his tail, jumping up and down kind of yeah, that's right. That prophecy is dead on. I'm going to be killed by the greatest wolf ever. But rather, just like Celegorm can know. Celegorm, I don't think necessarily can speak to Huan. I say that mostly because Huan's communications are kind of a big deal, right? But he certainly has a good rapport with Huan, and I think that he would basically say, he would be able to see that Huan hears and acknowledges that prophecy, essentially, that it's really kind of not news to him. Anyway, yeah, okay. So yeah, we can see. What about Eol? I don't. Is he ever going to meet Huan? I don't know that. I mean, yeah, I guess Huan can be with him when he meets Celegorm, but that's no, that's not the right context at all. First of all, no bad guys are going to be able to overhear that, or at least it would be a strain. Yeah. Stephen Cover says, "What's that, Huan? Timway is stuck in a well." Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I don't, not Eol. And the reason I say not Eol is that I don't want to. That seems to me a confounding variable in the Huan situation, right? I want Huan's destiny to be. What I mean by confounding variable is it means, so it adds the extra dimension of Eol's own, like, at least his malice, right? So if Eol says it, it's going to sound like a curse, even if he doesn't mean it as a curse, even if he's not actually cursing Huan, it's going to sound like he's cursed Huan to die. Or at the very least, I would think that many of our viewers could be forgiven if that's the conclusion they came to, right? After seeing Eol declare, speak the death of Huan. Whereas if a friend and ally and clear pro-Huan supporter says it, they're just making a prophetic declaration, right? So yeah, I don't think that we want Eol doing it. It could be one of the Feanorians. In some ways, it feels to me more right for it not to be a Feanorian, in the sense that, like, the person who makes it is not a person who hangs out with Huan all the time, right? And so in one way, it's like this person encountering Huan under these circumstances, seeing Huan, not necessarily for the first time ever, but like, it's not normal for them. So when the person, that's one of the reasons why they're sort of struck by it, in that moment. If you see what I mean by that. So yeah, Florian says Eol can stick to cursing his son. Well, that's exactly it, Florian, right? I mean, cursing folks and announcing their deaths is a kind of thing that Eol does, and I don't want to lump Huan's prophecy into that. Exactly. So yeah, Finrod seems a really good candidate. I could see Fingon. I could see Fingolfin, right? I could see, like Angrod or Eignor. And it could be a Feanorian. I could see Maedhros doing it. Or Maglor. Maglor would be my top choice if it were a Feanorian. Maedhros a close second. I wouldn't want it to be any of the sketchy guys. That is, Curufin or Kelgorm or Caranthir. Yeah. Yeah. It could be Galadriel. Hey, Dave is here making suggestions. Hang on a second. I'm going to bring Dave in. Hey, Dave. Welcome.
I shall speak it.
Yes.
How about
Galadriel, yes. And now she's a great candidate, of course. The question is when she would encounter Huan. It's possible. It could happen. It could work.
I hadn't thought that far along.
Yeah. But it has to be like the person has to encounter Huan, and it has to be at a moment and an occasion when like Huan has just drawn attention to himself, right, in some way, and again there have to be bad guys present who can take news of the thing back, or else we have to go out of our way to find another occasion on which they learn of it. So anyway,
any Doriath folks who might be candidates, like a Baelig.
I could see Beleg doing it. I could see Beleg or Mablung making this kind of a declaration. Beleg would be my top choice among them, but they're very minor characters this season. So I don't know, getting them in the right place at the right time would be even harder, I think. Stephen Cover says maybe Celeborn is impressed with Huan and declares no one could possibly defeat this magnificent creature, and then Galadriel corrects him. None except the greatest wolf who ever lived.
What about Melian?
Well, certainly she could do it, but she's not going to leave. Like, Huan's not going to go to Menegroth, and she's not going to. And anyway, nowhere Melian is going to be is possibly going to be a place where a bad guy could overhear it. It's the biggest challenge there, I think. So I think that lots of good possibilities there.
What if we played telephone, where Melian declares it in her court, someone else overhears it and becomes a rumor that gets spread.
we show rumors spreading. Yeah. It turns out originally she'd only said a wolf, and then like eventually it was like the greatest wolf who's ever lived. Yeah, no kidding. No, I do think that the prophecy thing. Yeah, no, Melian is not going to meet Huan. I agree. That seems she's too sedentary, Melian, to meet Huan. He's she's a moss gatherer and he's a stone doomed to rolling. So I don't think that's going to happen. Okay. Let's see. Stephen Cover asks the cheerful question: could one of the good guys overhear it and then later get captured and get the information tortured out of him? Yes, that's a theoretical possibility. Yes, you can tell a diehard film person. Can we get one of the good guys captured and tortured? The possible, but it's a complicated chain of events, and my idea is to simplify it into one, scene essentially. Anyway, okay, all right. So,
what if Melian declares it in court? It spreads as a rumor. Then one of the people who heard the rumor gets captured, tells it to his cellmate, and then that person gets tortured.
You're right. That is the most efficient possible way to do it. I think so.
I'm glad you agree.
Yeah. Hard to improve on the efficiency of that chain of events. Rhiannon is saying we need a film spin-off show just about Huan. Hard to argue with that, actually. We have like a couple seasons of Huan the early years, right? And oh man, yeah, no, there's absolutely. Yeah, totally agree with that. Yeah. Okay. Anyway. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Then, so that's it. That was the last thing I want to talk about. Let's go on to the big topic of today, which is season outline. So, the first of our awesome graphics. Here is the critical path of all of our plot threads from this season. So let's kind of look at the overview of these here, and then we'll be looking in particular at how these can be done in particular episodes. So first we have the Aravel thread. Aravel, her discontent, her choice to leave Gondolin, her passing through Nandon-Gortha, being separated from her companions, her meeting with Eol, her marriage with Eol, the birth of Maegwyn, and Aravel's like increasingly uncomfortable and unhappy domestic situation. Eol and Maegwyn visiting the dwarves as an excellent opportunity to bring the dwarves into it, as we were talking about before. And then, of course, Maegwyn and Aravel returning to Gondolin. And we have a little side note there of Finrod getting the Nauglamir from the dwarves of Nagrod, being a kind of a spin-off of the Eol and Maegwyn visiting the dwarves thing. Okay, so that's the first thread. And this I know has been a source of debate, like exactly how we, when the pacing basically for the Aravel story. And we'll look at that as we get more deep into the sort of episode by episode discussions there. And now we've got the human ones. So we've got the Beor line, which is sort of the longest one, as the plot line. I mean, that's sort of the longest plot line. We've got Beor meeting Finrod in episode 1, House of Beor moving to Nargothrond, the death of Beor, and then we've got the time in which the House of Beor is not doing all that much in Nargothrond, and then of course Andreth coming in young to the leadership of the people of Beor and leading the people out to Ladros, Andreth falling in love with Aignor, Barahir then taking over the leadership of the House of Beor in time for most of the House of Beor to be destroyed in the Dagor Bragalach. So that's the Beor thread through this. We also have, after the initial part of the House of Beor, right, after the death of Beor there, we've got 3 things going. We've got the Stockade Battle. So that is the people of Haleth come over and then they have the difficulty with orcs, hence the beginning of Haleth's heroic story. And then at around the same time, we've got the Green Elves in conflict with men. We decided for that to be the future House of Hador that they are conflicting with. And so those 2 things, the Stockade Battle and the Green Elf conflicts with men, those are basically happening while the House of Beor is already settled down into Nargothrond. Hador goes off to serve Fingolfin. So Haleth goes through Nandon-Gortheb. Hador goes off to serve Fingolfin. Sauron impersonates Amlach, right? All of that stuff is happening leading up to the Council of Estelad, the decision about what that other people is doing. Are they going to stay? Are they going to fight the elves? Are they going to leave? Are they going to ally themselves with the elves? And of course, that comes to a head there at the Council of Estelad, and Hador wins, right? The pro-elf faction, led by Hador, wins, and thus the people who remain become the House of Hador and move to the north after this. And so that happens at around the time when Haleth is finally working to settle down with her people. in the forest of Teglin, and she's killing Tevildo at around that same time. Then after that, of course, we have the double wedding, the intermarriage of the houses of the three houses of the Edain. And that comes at about the time Andreth moves the House of Beor to Ladros. So that's the overall shape of the human plot lines through the season. At the bottom there, you can see the bad guy plots. Sauron putting a spell on captive elves, stepping off to the side to impersonate Amlach and he's trying to stir up trouble between elves and humans. This is his big plan. Rogren and Anail escape from Angband. Both of them need to get out for different reasons. Hador is going to help, and that's how he is going to establish himself in the service of Fingolfin, is by helping with the escape of Rogren and Anail. And then, of course, we've got Thuringwethel spying on Anail and gleaning information from him in a super creepy, vampiric kind of way. Okay, so yeah, as Marie points out, Aradhel's story, you'll notice that there's a lot of interlace here among all of the other stories. Lots of arrows connecting boxes here, with the exception of the Aradhel story. The Aradhel story is almost complete. The only connection between the Aradhel story and the rest of them is that Aradhel has to get through Nandungortheb in one direction before Haleth and her people start going through in the other direction, right? Or we don't want to have a traffic jam, a plot traffic jam in Nandungortheb. So Haleth's trip westbound through Nandungortheb is serves as a bound on Aradhel's story. Her story has to she has to have met Eol by the time Haleth and her people are coming through, essentially, or else it's not going to work.
It's the only way Nandungortheb could get worse.
Exactly, a traffic jam. Yeah,
with a traffic jam.
Yeah. And I guess you can say, out there in LA, Dave, that at least you don't generally have giant spiders attacking during traffic jams. So
that is true.
There's an upside.
Giant spider on the 405.
There's probably days where people might appreciate that, like breaking up the monotony.
Right, exactly. When you're when you're hoping for an attack by monstrous giant spiders just to break up the monotony, it might be time to re-examine your life choices at that time. I'm just...
Yep, that is true.
I'm just thinking, just brainstorming.
Which is sort of what Haleth's people are doing.
Right, exactly.
Oh, I like the way you brought that back. That was very stylish.
That was good. So Bree Melvin says that 2020 isn't over yet. There's still time for giant spiders on the highways. It seems perhaps like the manifest destiny of late 2020 here. But anyway, okay. So the last thread that I didn't mention here, because it only comes in there at the end, is the Fingolfin plotline. That is the whole elves and do we attack or not. So Fingolfin's warning and the question about do we break the peace and attack Morgoth, and if so, how? That's going to come in towards the end, leading to Fingolfin's big push, which of course is going to culminate in his one-on-one duel of Morgoth after the Dagor Bragollach. So, and again, so timing-wise, as far as all of these other events are concerned, certainly as far as the other events with which they're interacting with the human events and stuff, we're going to be getting Fingolfin's warning and the discussions among the elves at the time when the House of Beor is already up in Dorthonion and the House of Hador is in the north. Like basically the pieces are essentially going to be set on the board for the Dagor Bragollach when Fingolfin brings that up. We'll have still stories developing, like the people of Beor adapting to to life on Dorthonion, and we're going to have the weddings and the establishment of those houses and development of characters like Barahir and young Baron and folks like that. Not to mention the Hador line as well. So we'll get all that stuff, and of course, Anael and Thuringwethel kind of weaving around through there. So truly, once Aradel clears Nan Dungortheb, the rest of her story is almost perfectly independent of everybody else. And all the rest of the action. I mean, clearly she needs to get back into Gondolin prior to the Dagor Bragalok, I think. What's that glow on the horizon, Myglin? So yeah, I mean, they need to be back in Gondolin by then. Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is the big overview to keep in mind. So to keep, as Maria's saying, one of the main points of this slide here is to make sure that we can kind of keep the sequence clear in our minds, what needs to happen before what, and the overall shape of the season as we think through and talk about the events themselves. Here's a little more detail on timeline constraints. And this comes to a lot of the changes we've been talking about making, some of the contractions and things that we've been discussing. So here's the working backwards from the timeline. So we start with the Dagor Bragalok right at the end of the season, which is first age 455. The double wedding, right? So that time of intermarriage, we're looking at 435 to 440. We need enough time for the offspring of those weddings to be active, right? We can't have Baron as a babe in arms, for instance, at the Dagor Bragalok. That ain't going to work. So we need to have the double wedding by about 440 at the latest, because then the kids born after the double wedding can be, at least teenagers by then. So the birth of Barahir, therefore, has to go back to 405 to 415, somewhere in that range. And the death of Haleth needs to be after first age 406, so that the move to Dorthonion from the House of Beor, happening between 406 and 420, so that they can be in place in time for the double weddings. For having them there by 420 also means that we get them a whole generation. I mean, they will have been living there for 30 years before the battle comes. More than 30 years, 30 to 40, 50 years even, prior to the battle. So they've had time to adapt to an active and outdoor culture now, and to make some of the changes that Andreth foresaw would be necessary and good for them to be making. We need Galdor to be born. That is Hador's son, Galdor, the father of Hurin and Huor. He needs to come in between first age 400 and 422, again, just in order for people to be the correct age. Hurin, needs to be around. So we need to get his dad born early enough. The birth of Andreth, to make sure that, Marie says that she wants Haleth alive at the double wedding. I'd be totally fine with Haleth alive at the double wedding. I don't think I have anything invested in Haleth's death. That is, I don't remember having specific plans either to say Haleth must die in this way or at this time or anything like that. So I think I'm willing to put her death wherever we want it to be, so long as it fits with her, her time span, her age span. Okay, we've got Right, the birth of Andreth, she's got to be born no earlier than 380. If she's born in 380, then that means she's 75 at the Dagor Bragalak. I think. See, I'm inclined to go early with her. 400 is given as the later bound of when Andreth could be born. That only makes her 55 at the time of the Dagor Bragalach, and I don't know. Like I said, I think we want her born a little sooner than that. I think I want her older than that. Essentially, it's. I think it's important that by the time we get to by the time we get to Dagor Bragalach, I think she should be aged. She should be elderly, not just not just not young anymore. She should be elderly, I think. Okay, so Marie, you're thinking having her born at 389 for an age of 66. That's on the young side of when I would want her to be there, but yeah. Well, Stephen H., I'm not really sure it's true that 60s is elderly for that time. 90s.
These are long life, aren't they?
Yeah.
Kind of long lived. Yeah, they're not.
Not like Elros style long lived, but
right.
but yeah, I mean the first few generations like of the House of Beor live into their 90s. So I don't think they would consider a 60-year-old man old. I mean, again, he's not young anymore.
So
right?
you're thinking like 80s?
Well, I mean, I think it would be fine for her to be. Let's see. So, Marie, tell me about why we don't want her born earlier. Yeah. Why don't we want her born earlier? Why can't? Because in theory, I would think, as far as her own age is concerned, without thinking of other concerns, as far as her age is concerned, we could have her born as early as 360, right? 360, she'd be 95 at the Dagor Bragalach, and that's elderly, right? But I mean, and that seems to me like the early bound. I mean, to have her much more than 95, I think would be starting to push it. But she's from a long-lived family, right? I think that could theoretically happen. Right. Yeah, okay, that's what I was thinking about. The timing of her romance with Ignor. That's the problem. Right. Okay, because if the move to Dorthonion doesn't happen until 406, she needs to be in like her 20s or 30s at latest at the time she's romancing Ignor. Yeah, agreed. That is the bound. Okay. So yeah, if that's the line that we can walk, but I'd say earlier. I'd say earlier if possible. And then we could have the move to Dorthonion be a little bit earlier as well, on the early end of its framework there too. So if Andreth is born, say 380, right? Just put her at the earliest limit there. If she's born in 380, that puts her at exactly 75 at the time of the Dagor Bragalach, which is cool. And the move to Dorthonion, if that also happens on the early end of its time frame, so if it happens in like the late 4-aughts, right? So like somewhere between 406 and 410, that still puts her in her late 20s when she meets Ignor. So that could happen. Okay, so born in 385, which is 70 at the time of the battle, moved to Dorthonion in 410. So that puts her 25. Okay. Yeah, I can live with that. So she's 25 when she moves to Dorthonion. That also gives the House of Beor a full 45 years in Dorthonion prior to the Dagor Bragalach. So again, you'll have a whole generation of warriors who will have grown up, been born in Dorthonion, and born and raised on the front lines, so the change will certainly have had plenty of time to take root. Then everyone who remembers the soft life in Nargothrond will be elderly by the time the Dagor Bragollach rolls around. So that's fine. Yeah. Yeah, good. Marie says that means Bari here, who would be a 4-year-old child at the time of the move. So he's not even really going to remember Nargothrond, right? But then he's 49 at the time of the battle. Yeah, I like that. Barahir being 49, so that means Barahir dies at age, what, 54? Or 5 years gap, right? 5 years as an outlaw. Yeah. Interesting. Brianna says, wizened 70s plus Haleth warrior fan art may happen tonight. Yes, Haleth is going to be a wizened warrior woman at whatever age she lives to, right? So yes, so Haleth at the age of 70, you would still not cut in front of her in line, right? I mean, there's no question about that. Yeah. That works for me. That totally works for me. Yeah. Oh yeah, Maria, I'm thinking Haleth still gets around at the age of 81, no question. Yeah. And again, I'm still thinking that you're still gonna watch what you say around her at that age. Definitely. Cool. Okay, so continuing to work backwards. So the council, then, the council at which the House of Hador's fate is decided, happens 380, can happen anywhere between 380 and 405, because this gives, of course, time for the House of Hador to move up north, prior to, presumably, the birth of Galdor, right? That would all be happening. That whole line would then be established up there in the north. So that makes sense. Yep, that works. And then this also, by the way, establishes one of the other things I like about that, about the council happening, at around the same time that Andreth is being born in Nargothrond. The thing that I like about that is that it gives a clear kind of sequence, right? The House of Haleth is the first one to decide its destiny, like to decide where it's going to go and what it's going to do, right? Then the council happens and the House of Hador decides its destiny. And then last, as it was first, right? The House of Beor is first in and they decide their destiny first, right? And head to Nargothrond. But now their reconsideration of their choice and their move to Dorthonion, comes in after, clearly after, like a couple decades after that has been established. So we can even have like news of the council would certainly be brought to Andreth and to the others of the House of, to Adenel and to Andreth both, in Nargothrond by Finrod, right? So that they would know what their other kindred are doing and the role that their other kindred are playing. And so that can then influence, Andreth's decision, right? It doesn't have to be, her choice doesn't have to be immediately in response to it. But again, she would know what is the direction that the other, the other human, elf friends, and unfriends, perhaps in some ways, in the case of Haleth, grudging friends, mostly non-hostile neighbors, but anyway, yeah. So that sequence works for me. And so even if there is overlap, right, like Marie was suggesting, if the council's in 399, so the council's a little bit later in that frame, and Andreth's birth is a little bit earlier, she'd still be 14, so she'd be old enough to like hear and understand, the news right after it happened. And if it's 399, and so she's hearing about it then, and then the move to Dorthonion happens maybe 5 years later, right? So there's been some time for her to be reflecting on this and to be using that as a way to kind of weigh, the destiny of her house and people and that kind of thing. That I think that works really well. Okay, so again, carrying on, working back, the Haladin then who move first, they have to move prior to the council happening. They're not part of that discussion. So somewhere between 365 and 405 is when that needs to happen. And then the stockade battle, of course, before that, in the late 300s, 350 to 390. And then, of course, Finrod is meeting Beor no earlier than 310 and no later than 350. So there's some flexibility there. Okay. No, that all is good. So again, the chain of events, I like it, right? I mean, the rough chain of the chronological sequence that we're working with here is Finrod meets Beor, the House of Beor goes to Nargothrond. The House of Haleth arrives, the stockade battle, Haleth's family killed, Haleth leads her people on their adventure, and they end up in Brethil. Then you've got the House of Hodor figuring out their thing, right? So you've got to have Hodor establishing himself with Fingon, right? And then you've got him coming back and participating in the council and the Great Council and the fake Amlach and all that stuff. And then of course we shift to young Andreth, who is the up and coming prodigy leader of the House of Beor, and she leads them to Dorthonion, and they establish themselves in Dorthonion, and thus we end up with Brethil, Dorloman, and Dorthonion as the three sites in place and ready, and now intermarrying and having all of the offspring everybody is supposed to have, so that we make sure everybody's ancestors get born on time, and then we have the Dagor Bragollach. And during that time, while the men have all settled down in the places where they're going to be and are comfortably intermarrying and begetting the appropriate offspring, is when then the elves start talking about, do we attack or do we not attack, and Fingolfin starts doing his thing. That sequence all seems to work. And I can certainly understand how the Aradhel plot, again, almost totally detached from this, right? So it's a lot less determined, and we only have really just the two things, right? We need, well, three things. There are three time factors we have to take in mind, right? The first is, as I said, the traffic in Dungortheb. The second is, as we've mentioned, she needs to be in Gondolin before the Dagor Bragollach breaks out. And then the third thing is Maegwyn's age, right? So her return to Gondolin should happen at least 40 years after the birth of Maegwyn. Agreed. 40 seems a good year. I mean, we're talking about like 35, 40 being the early bound. As a 40-year-old, Maegwyn would be a moody elvish teenager, and that seems fine to me. He doesn't have to be a fully, emancipated adult by the time she takes him back. In fact, I find it kind of attractive if he is not a fully emancipated, full-grown adult. If she still considers him her child, right, and is trying to protect him and guide him. But he's got to be old enough. He can't just be, a toddler, and he can't be even an elementary school kid, right? He needs to be independent in order to initiate things and stuff. So yeah, that I like that. I like that, and I think that'll work in the compressed time frame that we're dealing with here in this season, that we've constructed in this season. So if her return to Gondolin, that can happen really anytime during that final phase. The men are all settled in their spots phase, right? Can be when she heads back prior to the battle, obviously. Which just means that Maegwyn has to be born 40 years before. We've got plenty of time. We got plenty of time for them, but we'll see. We'll see. Yeah, Stephen H. The trying to initiate things with Maegwyn trying to initiate things with Idril. Here's the main thing. I agree. We don't want to have we don't want to have a Padme and Anakin situation, right? With Maegwyn and Idril. No question. We want the grown-up actor playing Maegwyn at that point. But at the same time, it's not going to be a plot in this season. I mean, we're going to plant the seeds of it, right? I mean, there needs to be like an exchange of looks at some point, you know, and I mean, I don't think we go any further than, you know, Mygwin looks at Idril and Idril looks at Mygwin and Idril gets the heebie-jeebies. Like that's, you know, and they don't even speak, right? But we have no time. We have no time to develop that plot line, nor do we want to, right? Mygwin's development and Idril's development, we need to save those, right? Because that's part of the Gondolin story. And apart from Aravel and Mygwin, this is not a Gondolin plot. It starts and ends in Gondolin, but this is the Aravel, Eol, Mygwin plot, which is important to the future of Gondolin, but it's not really the Gondolin story yet. So I think we want to not be distracted by that. So in that way, again, it doesn't really matter super much to me how appropriate they look as a couple then, but he does need to be physically mature, sufficiently physically mature for them to have an uncomfortable gaze, right? And not just for her to be like, ooh, who's the creepy little child, right? It can't be that, clearly. Yeah, I agree, Marie. Season 7 really seems to be the earliest moment at which we could start the uncomfortable non-romance between Mygwin and Idril. But again, I'm ready to save it because we've got the long game to play on that one. It's going to be some time before Mygwin becomes a major character. You know, we need to keep an eye on him and make sure people don't forget who he is and where he came from. But yeah, he's going to be a ways off. Anyway, okay. One thing I wanted to acknowledge, Rhiannon, you were bringing this up, and this is a really important issue, and I agree with you. Let me just say that at the beginning. And so I think that you're right to mention this as we're thinking through not on this level, right? Not like the big, huge picture of making sure all the dates line up. That's obviously the place where we have to start, right? But as we're drilling down and beginning to think episode by episode, one of the challenges of the timelines, of the chronology of this season, is that sometimes time is going to be passing faster and sometimes it's going to be passing more slowly, right? So as Rhiannon was pointing out, most of the time during a single episode, we're going to, when we're going back and forth between an A plot and a B plot, we're going to want time to be passing sort of at the same pace between them, right? If in the A plot, a week and a half has gone by, and in the B plot, 100 years have gone by, it's going to be a challenge for people to follow. Not impossible, but it is going to be a challenge. There are ways that one can play with that, right? The really gorgeous play with chronology that they accomplished in The Witcher season 1 comes immediately to mind, right? That was by far my favorite thing about The Witcher season 1, which I finally watched recently. And that was absolutely fantastic. Just loved that. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So anyway, so I agree, Rhiannon, that it's a concern we have to keep in mind. And so we just have to be aware of the fact that there will be times we may have to be kind of jumping forwards and backwards in time a little bit. And, we have to be, it's doable, but we have to be conscious of the sort of challenges there and how we're framing the stories in some ways. So anyway, I just wanted to, that was a really good and appropriate comment there. Now let's see a few other general things. One general kind of question or sort of discussion that was happening on the discussion boards was about Doriath. Doriath, of course, is going to be primarily incidental to the other plot lines this season. Are we okay with that? And my answer is yes, I am okay with Doriath. I mean, we're not going to be everywhere at once, right? We can't be giving equal time to everywhere. As I said, Gondolin is also marginalized in this season. A little bit less so because one of the major plot threads of the season begins and ends there. But and of course it will be talked about during that plot line consistently, even when they're not there. But still, it's not like a. Meanwhile, in Gondolin, we're not going to get much of that. We're going to get very little of Círdan at the Havens, as we discussed. So, and that's fine. I mean, that's going to happen. That's inescapable, I think. And will happen in many seasons. So that's fine. We have enough happening, like with the, not Finrod, Thingol deciding to forbid men to come. We're gonna have enough. Like, we'll visit, right? Plus, of course, having Haleth skirting around the edges and interacting with Beleg in various ways. So that's fine. That's fine. I don't think we need to, to bring in major plot lines with the Doriath folks. They've had some time. They were a big focus last season. They're going to be a big focus next season. They can have a season off. It's all good. Okay, yeah, no, that's excellent. Okay. Let's go on to specific, more color coding. Now, I don't know how well you could, this is as big a print as we could make it and fit it on the slide. You might have to expand some things and zoom in a little bit if you can to see this. I'll read aloud what I'm talking about so you'll be able to see that. But this is the outline, the overall outline of the season. So episode 1, Beor, right? So we've got the A plot, B plot, and potential C plot. The color codes are that we got the legend up at the top. Green are elf plots. The beige are men plots. Purple are villains, and the dwarves are red. We don't get much dwarves here, but okay, that's fine. Any dwarves are good for this season, I think. So A plot of episode 1, the proposal here is Beor, of course, leading his people into Beleriand, meeting Finrod, becoming his vassal, and moving to Nargothrond, or at the very least choosing to move to Nargothrond. Maybe we have them arrive. So that's the A plot of episode 1. That seems perfectly sensible. Aredhel restless in Gondolin. So let me tell you what. Let us, instead of going through horizontally, let me go through vertically. I'm going to go through vertically, and then we'll correlate that with the B and C plots. I'm trying to figure out how to discuss this. I think that would be better. So let's get the main line, the proposed main line through the 13 episodes for the season. Oh, wait, hang on a second. I think I only have, oops, darn it. I think I only have the first 11 on here. Hang on. Let me go to plan B. I should have a plan B here. Hang on. Yeah, because we're gonna be ending on a cliffhanger here if we're not careful. Okay, hang on. Is it this one? Nope. Distinctly not that one. Oh, I know. Hang on. It was this one. Wait, where'd it go? I have so many windows open. I can't find them. Hang on. Okay, no, that's not the one I'm looking for. No, that's the Gantt chart. This is a more detailed one. That's not the one I'm looking for either. Hang on, let me see. Maybe I closed it. Yes. Okay, here's the Sheets version of it. Okay. And let me blow that up. Okay. This is good. I can blow this up a little bit more and make it a little bit more legible too. Okay. All right. That's fine. Okay. Whew. Found it. There we are. All right. Great. Okay. So, yeah, I know we know 12 and 13 are the Dagor Bragalok, but there's still some other things to think about there. Okay. So I'll go through the A plots of all 13 episodes here. So again, first one, I already said, Beor leads his people to Beleriand, meets Finrod, becomes his vassal, moves to Nargothrond. Episode 1. Episode 2, Aredhel focus. Aredhel is the A-plot. Her departure from Gondolin, traveling through Nandun Gortheb to East Beleriand. So that means we don't have the meeting with Eol, we just have her departure and her separation from her people. That's the proposal there for episode 2. Episode 3, we've got the death of Beor and elves discover mortality, right? So that's kind of both humans and elves there. So it's a Nargothrond focused episode, which is heavily focused on the issues between elves and men, basically, and they're coming to begin to understand the differences better between the two of them. Elves and men, that is. Episode 4 is the first Haleth episode, the big Haleth episode. This is the one where the stockade battle happens. So it's mostly the stockade battle and probably her decision, right? Like, she's probably, I'm thinking, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, episode 4 would end with like her meeting with Caranthir and saying no to Caranthir and saying, you know, as for my people, we will like make our own way, right? Basically, that's where episode 4 ends. Okay. And then episode 5, the conflict between the Green Elves and the Men of Estelad, mediated by Celeborn and Galadriel. Remember, we talked about that. So this is the big unfriendship episode. And this is when the third and largest house of the men are coming into Beleriand now in episode 5. So it's nice. We've got 4 episodes in between, right? Episode 1 to episode 5, it's taking for the men to come in. Episode 6 is the escape. Okay, so the primary plot is the escape by Rogren and Anail. And that's good. That gives time for young Hodor to get there, right? So Hodor is going to be involved, right, in episode 6. So, yeah. Okay, good. And so that they've made it, right? The House of Hodor, the future House of Hodor has made it into Beleriand, and now we've got Hodor heading over there. That's all good. Okay, episode 7, the Council of Estelad called by Bereg and Amlach results in the House of Hodor moving to Dor Lomin. Okay, so the big council episode is then episode 7, Hodor coming back and being like, hey, let's go visit the elves. Then episode 8, that's Andreth, right? So we've got Andreth visiting, scrolling down here, Andreth visiting schools Finrod on the error of the Valinor impulse. She moves the House of Beor from Nargothrond to Ladros. Okay, good, right? All right, we're decamping from Nargothrond in episode 8. Episode 9, Aignor and Andreth fall in love in Dorthonion, but what brings them together drives them apart. So the tragic love story, the reciprocated but unconsummated relationship between Aignor and Andreth, leading to her tragic misunderstanding of that situation and her subsequent bitterness in the second part of her life, the longer part of her life, of course. Yes. And then episode 10, Aredhel and Maegwyn return to Gondolin. Eol follows and kills her. So we have that in episode 10. Then episode 11, Fingolfin's big push to attack Angband fails to get off the ground. And then episode 12 and 13 is the Dagor Bragalak. I like that. So one of the questions I know was, where does Aredhel's return to Gondolin happen in Roy? I like that. I think that grouping those things, grouping Fingolfin's big push and the Dagor Bragalak together at the end. We don't want Aredhel to just be like interrupting that. There's there needs to be some momentum towards catastrophe, right? Episode 11 will be entirely pushing towards battle, right? You know, can this piece end? You know, can we make it? Can we make it happen? Can we make it through? Can we win this battle? Can we continue the siege? You know, should we attack? Having everybody thinking about that in the one episode, and then the battle comes upon them in the next episode. I like that. I like that a lot. I don't want and here's the thing I like most about it. The failure of Fingolfin's big push. There's an element of the juxtaposition of Fingolfin's big push and the battle. There's a tragic like frustration there, right? Like, oh, maybe it would have worked. Like it was almost there. Like it's just and then it's too late, right? So yeah, I think that I like that a lot. And Nick, I don't know, you know, I mean, I can see so I guess one of the objections that some folks are feeling is that if the Aradel story is just over, then like it's over a little prematurely. It like, you know, I guess there are some who have the impulse to bring, you know, Aradel and Maegwyn's story to its culmination closer to the end of the season. And I hear that, but here's the thing. There is no connecting it with the Dagor Bragollach. I don't think there is. I don't see how we would want to do that or try to do that. So, you know, so Nick, like taking that to the to its logical extreme, right? The logical extreme would be to have Aradel and Maegwyn returning to Gondolin in episode 13. Right. That's the logical extreme of that reasoning that says we want her plot arc to match the arc of the season. We can't, I mean, what are we going to cut away from the Dagor Bragollach to like, and now, you know, speeches in Gondolin, like I don't see that working. I really don't. So if it's happening at the same time as the battle, it's going to be a mere distraction. And if it's not, the latest it could be is episode 11. And is the difference between episode 10 and episode 11 that great? I don't think it is. I really don't. I mean, you're going to have these major weighty events, namely the Dagor Bragollach, after it anyhow, right? Dominating the culmination of the season. So the Dagor Bragollach is going to be hogging the headlines in the last couple episodes of the season, no matter what happens. So, you know, 2 or 3, it's, you know, whether the war with Morgoth is hogging the headlines for 2 episodes or 3 doesn't seem to me to be a huge difference. Again, I can see how, you know, architecturally speaking, it would be nice to have all of our major plots be culminating. And we did a really good job of that, I thought, in the last season, in season 4, bringing everything together in episodes 12 and 13. Yeah. So I think that's just kind of the way it is, and I think we can live with it. Yeah, exactly, Marie. Having Galadriel's wedding interrupted by the attack of a dragon. I'm not literally, of course, in the wedding, but juxtaposing the wedding and the dragon. That was already kind of pushing this envelope a little bit, but I thought it worked really well last season. Again, this season, we don't want the Dagor Bragollach to be like the B plot, or pushing the Aradel plot. Yeah. So no, I think I like this. I like episode 10. I like that very much because I really like the juxtaposition of Fingolfin's big push with the battle. That's definitely my favorite part. Not to mention, there's something slightly attractive to me about the other juxtaposition, the episode 9 to episode 10 juxtaposition, the Aignor and Andreth relationship, the so near and yet so far relationship, and then the final descent into ultimate dysfunction of the other dysfunctional relationship of season 5, right, in Aradel and Eol. juxtaposing those two, I think, is kind of fun. Also, I think there are lots of ways in which we can kind of make those two episodes kind of play on each other in some ways. I think there's some fun opportunities there. So I like that too. So, yep. Episode 10, totally convinced. Okay, so I am loving that sequence. And then, of course, I didn't even get to 12 and 13. The Dagor Bragalak, sure. But where are we dividing this? We've got the Dorthonian. So the proposal here is that the Dorthonian front is the emphasis of episode 12. The deaths of both Agnor and Angrod and Bregor all happen there in episode 12. Then in episode 13, we have Fingolfin's reaction to the Dagor Bragalak and his final, and then the duel with Morgoth. So yeah, love that. We have the first half be the emphasis on the devastation wrought, right, and the deaths of, most of the important people who die, and then have the episode 13 be really focused on Fingolfin, his experience of it, and then going back to what he was doing and saying and thinking and dreaming and such in episode 11. So yes. Yeah, that's good. That's good. All right. So let me go back then to the B plots, the B and C plots here together. All right. So in episode 1, which was Beor and Finrod and Beor going to Nargothrond, we also have Aradhel's restlessness in Gondolin, where we've got to get her ready to depart. So we need to. So the B plot will be setting up Aradhel. I like that. That pacing seems to be really good to me. I'm totally happy to give her a whole episode as the B plot, right? We don't necessarily have to spend a huge amount of time with her, but it shouldn't be something that happens immediately. We definitely don't want it to look like a merely impulsive piece of impatience. We've talked about that before. So giving us some time to establish that, and for Turgon to deliberate, say no, and then give in and be convinced. So there's going to need some time. So episode 1, that seems really good there. And then, okay, I think I can, there we go. We can get most of it in. There we go. All right. And then, the C plot is the reaction to the arrival of men in Balerion. So there we have, different reaction shots, right, as men are coming in. Oh, the aftercomers have arrived, right? So yeah, we certainly need to establish that. And that will help to set the framework for a bunch of the human-oriented plots that we will get. We'll get, Galadriel and Celeborn. We can introduce them, remind everybody that they're still in that area, right? So we can have Galadriel and Celeborn responding. We can have Thingol and Melian, her hearing news of it, right? He doesn't have to ban. The ban is going to be later on, but again, it can come to Melian, right? The news. The Feanorians, of course. We need to have the Feanorian reaction. Fingolfin can hear about it. So yeah, I really like that. Okay, now, episode 2. Episode 2 is one of Aradhel's 2 primary episodes, like ones where Aradhel is the A plot, right? She's the protagonist of the episode. And this is her departing from Gondolin, going through the Nand Gortha, being separated from her people, and going off to East Beleriand. Now, the one of the points of debate, I think, is, Aradhel entering Nan Elmoth, meeting Eol, and becoming engaged. Like the romance between Aradhel and Eol is scheduled for the next one, for episode 3. And so I get one point of debate is, do we end episode 2 with Aradhel meeting Eol, or do we have her meet Eol at the beginning of the next episode? Let me think about that. Hang on. Let's look at the B and C plots. So the B and C plots, proposed B and C plots for episode 2, while Aradhel is traveling and getting to Nan Elmoth, in the general Nan Elmoth neighborhood, is the House of Beor life in Nargothrond, the friendship of Beor and Finrod. So this is where we get like the Beor and Finrod bromance montage, right? Them mini golfing together and, whatever they do, hanging out. And potential visit to Círdan. So this is where we bring Círdan in. Okay. All right. Sure. I could see that. And then the C plot, Fingolfin expressing confidence in the effectiveness of the siege of Angband and Fingon setting off for East Beleriand. So Fingon is going to scope out the humans, the newly arrived humans. Fingolfin is going to be thinking that the siege of Angband is going to be all good. Okay, good. Okay, so Marie, this is one of the things I'm concerned about. I don't know that I like Beor going to visit Círdan. Tuor is supposed to be the first human to see the ocean. That's a mythic moment. Tuor stands on the shores of the sea is a big mythic moment. And I don't know that I want to lose that. I know it's not necessarily a third. I know, Marie, that's like, it is said that he was the first one to, yeah. I see you guys were debating this on Sunday. By the way, great session on Sunday. I actually tuned in for some of it. Our script writing team was broadcasting into the wee hours of Sunday evening this past week, talking about episode 1. Anyway, so on the one hand, I always found, like, part of me always found that bit about Tuor a little strange, because humans have been in Beleriand for an awful long time, have never one of them been curious enough to travel to the coast, though they'd certainly heard about it from the elves. So on the one hand, I felt like I always kind of had to suspend disbelief on that point. But at the same time, it's kind of awesome as well. So I don't know. Yeah. So Stephen, humans aren't being drawn westward in the same way, I think. No, they don't have like the sea longing kind of thing. Like, it's not like the sea that they're being drawn towards the light in the west. And when they meet the elves, they feel that they've found it. Or rather, like, they meet the elves and they're told, yeah, there's like a big light in the, well, I mean, he used to be bigger, to be honest, but anyway, yeah, way in the west, but you can't get there. So you might as well stop walking. No, I mean, they settle down. But yeah, yeah. Yeah, exactly, Florian. They meet the Calaquendi, and there's the light in the west, right? As far as they're concerned. Okay, but I'm okay. We want Beor to meet Círdan. It's fine. Goodness knows, Tuor will have enough firsts in his life, and needless to say, Tuor's encounter with the sea is going to be somewhat more striking and personal than Beor's. So, it's not like we're going to be really seriously diminishing Tuor's encounter with Olmo, right? Just by having Beor having once had a seaside vacation, a couple hundred years before. So, I think that's, I'm willing to bend on. I just wanted to make sure we're counting the cost there. That's all. Just want to make sure we're counting the cost. Okay. Anyway. All right. So that seems fine. Rhiannon, I think I'm on your side. And not just for time purposes, but for dramatic purposes. The encounter with the tall, dark stranger in the forest seems like a good ending note for the episode. Who is that tall, dark stranger? Credits roll. Not cheesily, but you see what I mean? Like, it gives a culmination point. Like, it gives an end point to the episode. Whereas, like, I mean, yes, we couldn't easily do it that like she separated from her companions and Glorfindel and Ecthelion have to go home and she eventually, and she, you know, her choice to go off on her own. That's all good stuff. And her resolution to continue could be enough of an ending point to make a worthwhile episode. But I think the first encounter with Eol seems to me, yeah. Nick is reminding me that I'd wanted to get Arathel to get to the homes of the Feanorians and find that they aren't there. Yeah. Hey, but she's the A-plot in this episode. She can be all over the place. Yep. Especially if we've established her unrest fully in episode 1, right? So episode 2 can begin with them on horseback, right? Like she can even say farewell to Turgon at the end of episode 1, right? I mean, they're like, bye, I'll leave in the morning, bye. And Turgon's like, I've got a bad feeling about this. And she's like, I don't care. See ya. Right. So, I mean, like the leave taking can happen at the end of episode 1. So episode 2 begins with like, you know, Arathel and Glorfindel and Ecthelion on a horseback, essentially, right? Like riding through the pass, right? Or does that not fit with what you guys have already talked about episode 1? Anyway, I'm just saying, if episode 2 focuses on the journey, there's plenty of time for her to have a multi-stop journey in which not too very many things happen. I mean, she doesn't have a whole series of events at the Feanorians, right? She just gets there and moves on. Anyway, but yeah, I'm just thinking, like, again, who is that tall dark stranger, right? Is it like, I think if we don't have to get further than that at the end of episode 2, but that seems to me like a better ending point, so that, especially since Arathel is shifting to the B plot in episode 3, right? So if we've already established Arathel has met a tall dark stranger, like the unfolding of her slightly disquieting romance with the tall dark stranger it's more easily be plottable, I think, if we strike the first note at the end of episode 2. Okay, but so then episode 3, Death of Beor, elves wrestling with the mortality concept. That's when Arathel is wrestling with the romance with Eol concept, right? And then the C plot is Fingon observes a settlement of men from a distance. So we've got Fingon. He was coming to East Beleriand, right? He's coming in. So we're gonna have we're getting ready for him to meet up with towards his meeting up with Hodor, right? But the settlement of men he's observing from a distance is, I assume, the Haladin, in fact, right? In preparation for the Stockade battle, which happens in the next episode? Or because we don't have they're not coming in, the House of Hodor isn't coming in until episode 5, right? With the unfriendship. Right, exactly. So that introduces the Haladin, right? Okay, that's what I thought. So he sees the Haladin from a distance and is like, ooh, there's the men that I hear about. And then we meet them, this other people of men, in episode 4, the Stockade battle, and they're all destroyed. And why doesn't Fingon help them? He must have wandered off and gone somewhere else, right? So he sees them and is like, I'm going to be all anthropological about this, and I'm going to, maybe he introduces himself. I don't know, right? But does he introduce himself? Say hi, hey, but I'm totally hands off. I'm like friendly, and I'm not going to freak you out, and I'm not trying to take over. And then he goes to visit Maedhros, right? Friend Maedhros, right? Perhaps something like that. Okay, right, great. And so Stockade battle, Bulldog leading the Stockade battle. Haleth saving the rest of her people after the death of her family. The B plot, Arathel and Eol have been married, and they're traveling and meeting the dwarves in the birth of Maegwyn. So we establish the Eol and the dwarf thing. Arathel going around with him, so she's not just locked in the house yet, and Maegwyn is born. We have to have congenial relationships for the begetting of a child. And our C plot is Sauron puts his spell of not so bottomless dread on sleeping elf prisoners in Angband, trying to begin his plan there. Now, Stephen H. is asking, Bulldog. How does Sauron learn of the Stockade battle to express his displeasure at Bulldog and maybe Gothmog's antics? Easy. Sauron knows what's going on, right? Sauron has spies everywhere. Especially, I mean, this is what like Tevildo and her people are doing, right? You don't have like a swarm of spy bats and not keep in touch with what's going on around Beleriand, right? So he's, I mean, the Stockade battle makes a noise, right? So he finds out about that and he gets frustrated and irritated and is like, how are you, what's your plan? Would he express it to Bulldog's face? Well, I don't think we're going to see it. I don't think we're going to, I mean, we're not going to show that, but would he? Sure. Sauron outranks Bulldog, right? Bulldog he's a kind of a big deal. I mean, he's the uber orc, but he's still an orc and therefore a flunky. He's certainly not on Sauron's level. He's maybe the peer of Sauron's lieutenants, right? But Sauron also isn't going to waste his time yelling at Bulldog because he knows that Bulldog is just a gun that somebody else points at folks. So he didn't make the plan, right? So he's not going to waste his being upset at Bulldog, I don't think. But I agree, Nick. I don't think he's going to be like super hot and bothered about it. But I think that, again, if we do want to show the beginning of this sort of gap between Sauron and Morgoth, Sauron's disapproval of these kinds of tactics, like, look, only, this is not going to do us any good in the long run. This is short-sighted thinking, the attack. Okay. Episode 5. A plot is the unfriendship plot with the Green Elves and the incipient House of Hador coming over the mountains. And the B plot is going to be Haleth crossing Nandan Gortheb after being denied entry into Doriath. So we've got them on the move. Everybody's on the, well, House of Beor still isn't on the move yet, but the other two are on the move. And this is when we get Thingol's ban on men entering Doriath and Melian's reaction. That's the C plot. That makes perfect sense to me because this is going to be our most Doriath-centered episode of the entire season anyway, right? Because we are going to be having Haleth skirting around the perimeters of Doriath and being denied by Beleg and stuff. So it's going to be most relevant to bring up the whole human question and the question of humans entering Doriath. So that's perfect. Episode 6 then is the escape from Angband. So now we shift entirely up to Angband. Rogrin and Anail escape. Hador is going to be, the C plot is going to be Hador at the age of 18 taking service with Fingolfin and aiding in Rogrin's escape. So Fingon and Hador have to both, could they go back together? We had Fingon over here, right? Over in this area. Could he take Hador back with him? I mean, could they meet and he could, because that seems logical, right? So it's not just like some teenagers are like, I know, I'm going to cross the continent in the hope that the elves will take me in, right? It'd be a little bit more natural if Fingon is there and saying, hey, come back to my house and good. That's the plan. Excellent. I think that's an excellent plan. Good. So Fingon brings him back over and then Fingon and Hador help with the escape. And that's when Fingon gifts Hador the dragon helm, which is going to go over. That's going to be super impressive at the council, right? And the B plot is Haleth settling in Brethil and killing Tevildo. So we're near the end, not of her life, but of the trajectory of the Haladin there. Good. And then we've got episode, what are we up to? 7, the Council of Estelad, called by Bereg and Amlach. Right. And then we've got Sauron infiltrating the council is the B plot. So we've got the men as the A plot around the council. The B plot is Sauron infiltrating, and the fake Amlach plot. And then the C plot, we've got back to Arthel. Meanwhile, Arthel is raising young Miglin and Nan Elmoth no longer permitted to travel, so the relationship has gone further downhill. We've got Eol creepily not naming his kid, just calling him, my son. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So all kinds of, Eol can be in full creepy mode here, right? Like things have really gone south, but Miglin's already born. Yep. Okay, so that's the C plot there of episode 7. Episode 8, now we shift back to Nargothrond. So the House of Hodor, they've decided to move up to Dor Lomin, right? Hodor wins the council, right? And they go up to Dor Lomin. Cut back to Nargothrond. Andreth, young Andreth at the age of 25, has a conversation with Finrod, explains how they need to leave, and she leads them out of Nargothrond. The B plot there is Aredhel telling Miglin stories of Gondolin. Love that parallel. Love it. That is beautiful. Andreth talking about like, oh, it is our destiny to be, like we need to go, and Aredhel telling Miglin stories, and Miglin wanting to go, and Eol taking Miglin to visit the dwarves. Really cool. Love that. Love that. I think that's really neat. And also like kind of uncomfortable, right? The way that it parallels Andreth's initiative and like Aredhel and Miglin on the other side is a little uncomfortable. I think a pleasant discomfort, right? And the choice to move to Nargothrond is in a sense being paralleled with the Gondolin movement, right? But it's also a kind of a counter parallel. It's moving in a different direction. We shouldn't be isolated and kept and preserved here within these walls. We need to be out there, which is kind of like what Aredhel thinks anyway. So I love that. Really, really cool stuff. As well as, Nick, as you say, the contrast between the very creepily by this time, possessive and restrictive Eol, and Finrod, on the other hand, being generous and letting them go, right? So there's another obvious contrast there, which is that's brilliant. That's my favorite A-B plot so far in the whole season. Episode 9, then the Aignor and Andreth love story after we get to Dorthonion. Okay, this is where it seems to be one of the biggest questions on the B and C plots. The C plot is Thuringwethil vamping out with Anael and stealing his memories, as I was suggesting. The B plot may be a dwarf story, right? We've established the dwarves a couple times. We've had Eol and Aredhel meeting the dwarves back in episode, what was it, 3? 4? Episode 4. We've had Eol and Miglin visiting the dwarves just in the previous episode. So continuing a dwarf story, possibly with Finrod and the Nauglamir. That's true. We do need to get the Nauglamir built at that point. Do I think that Andreth is too old for her love story at 28? I certainly do not. Now, look, first of all, look, the whole May-December thing, right? Like the May-Fly-December thing between Andreth and Aignor. We're talking about a very serious age gap, no matter how old Andreth is, but let's be honest. It's going to look creepy. I mean, if she were really young, if Andreth were like, 19 or something like that, it would be, I like her being more mature, right? And it's not like 28's old, right? But I like, she arrives, not as, she's no longer just like the child prodigy who is, accepted at a young age as the new leader of her people. She is now, the fully mature, well-established leader of her people coming in. She's going to be impressive, not just as a young, fresh, face, but she's going to be, her wisdom and leadership. She will have been seasoned also by the journey, right, with her people. So she's not just going to be, hi, I'm also sheltered and innocent. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Maria, I think many of us can agree that 28 is not too old. Yes, yeah, I think there are many people in the audience who perhaps have an investment in that concept. Yes. Florian, I agree. I don't think that the Nauglamir is essential for this season. Yeah, I'm not 100% sold on this bit, on the dwarf story there. Maybe. Didn't I have dwarf ideas? I guess if we did a dwarf plot, it would seem to me best to have it actually be connecting to, like, the whole idea that I had about Arthel wanting to help create an alliance, right? If we have that kind of fall apart in some way, maybe, or because Aol is such a creep. Yeah, I know Finrod is dying soon, but he isn't dead yet. There's time still to commission the... Yeah, I mean, first of all, like, the commissioning, the making of the... Like, those don't have to be plot points. Like, the Nauglamir, Finrod unboxing the Nauglamir can happen in episode 1 if we wanted to, right? I mean, it's... Yeah. Does he need to? I don't know that he does need to have it before the Dagor Bragollach. He just needs to have it before he dies. I mean, does he need it before the Dagor Bragollach? But he doesn't use it in the Dagor Bragollach or anything. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't see that as absolutely essential. Because the Nauglamir just has to exist. Now, sure, there's an argument to be made for that. Rhiannon says, why would he be commissioning a necklace when half of Beleriand is at war? More convenient way to carry more of your jewels if you've got to run for it. No, I mean, I hear that. I have an answer, though, Rhiannon. Here's my answer. When half of Beleriand at war is when you want to cement your alliances with dodgy potential allies who are still on the outskirts of the battles. And the dwarves of Nogrod would very much fit into that category. So if a subplot of the early section of season 6 were, as the elves attempt to recover post Dagor Bragollach and regain some kind of a clear foothold here in Beleriand, I mean, that's obviously going to dominate the first couple episodes in addition to the Baron and Luthien stuff. We're going to have that happening in the early parts of season 6. Finrod reaching out to the elves of Nogrod makes sense. And what better way to reach out to them than to say, like, hey, let's bring together, I mean, we can even foreshadow it, right? And he can even propose, like, these gems are some of the greatest of the craftsmanship of my people. I will give them to the greatest craftsmen of your people, and we shall make, together a thing which is, again, so this as a friendship alliance making thing, right? See, Rhiannon, I know that it's not yet, like, that is only really going to be fulfilled when the Silmaril is part of it, right? But that's the deal. Like, and then his praise for it and everything, and they would be into this. Like, I would think that this would be the path to the hearts of the dwarves of Nogrod, right? At least initially. Now I agree, Nick, that it does, like, the contrast between Finrod and Aol makes it relevant in this season. I can see that, certainly. I don't know. Finrod seems to have enough to do. I'm not totally against it. We can talk about it more as we get closer to it. But I'm not sure I'm seeing, it just feels like it doesn't feel relevant to the events of this season. Especially since the forging of the Nauglamir is the beginning of a plot arc which is going to culminate in the downfall of Doriath, right? So it's another reason why I kind of want to push it back, because to me, putting the forging of the Nauglamir in the same season, not forging is not exactly the right word, but you know what I mean, in the same season as Thingol dooms Doriath by asking for a Silmaril, right? Those fit together, right? Eventually, they're literally going to fit together, right, in the remade Nauglamir that Thingol is going to make. That's still a little bit of a ways off, but I kind of like having if we associate the Nauglamir from its day one with, through A plot, B plot kinds of thing with Thingol. I mean, what if Finrod's commissioning of the Nauglamir is like the B plot of the Baron brought before Thingol episode, right? When Thingol, brings Doriath under the doom of Mandos, right? See what I mean? Like that to me, that's better than, it's more relevant there in season 6. It feels to me than this. And I know it's like a bit of a rush. I know it's a bit of a rush to get the Nauglamir commissioned prior to Finrod's death. He still will have time, even at that point. I know Baron's going to set out and go to Nargothrond, but again, he can get back. Anyway, yeah. So
I want to register a vote in favor of this proposal.
Okay, yeah. Wait, in favor of this of saving the Nauglamir till season 6?
Yeah. I like the juxtaposition that you've proposed. I agree. That seems portentous if you do it that way.
Because
I like it.
The purpose of the Nauglamir. Like the Nauglamir is part of the story of the fall of Doriath. That is its purpose. It is Finrod who commissions it, but it has no other role. It's not important except for the only reason to include it, other than for sentimental reasons, is as part of the story of the fall of Doriath. So, but I don't want to do the story of the fall. I don't want to start the story of the fall of Doriath. We don't need it. Again, timing is going to be a little, we'll see how the timing can work, but I don't want to be, it's too early to be worrying about the downfall of Doriath yet. We could make portents of that in this season, but why would we want to? Let's save it for next season when that's going to be, the doom of Doriath is going to be spelled out by the end of that season. Like, we don't know how it's going to happen. We don't know when it's going to happen, but Melian will have actively prophesied the downfall of Doriath by, within the first half of season 6. Right. So
I think this is one of those things that this is one of those funny things that arises in an adaptation of this kind, right? Where I think in the book, Tolkien there's no qualms about foreshadowing things like this, like from the very beginning, even, because it's just kind of all up front, like, oh, we're telling this story.
Right.
And arguably most people coming to it probably are already pretty familiar with it because they've read Lord of the Rings, etc. But I think in a show like this, we don't want people worrying about that this season. We want to have like these. There's some stories that we're planting in earlier seasons and then paying off in much later seasons. But in general, we're trying really hard to have these season-long arcs, right? Yeah. And I think Fall of Doriath really that kind of makes sense as for next season as kind of like an arc for that whole season. Wouldn't want to lose we don't want people worrying. We don't want the audience worrying about this season, and we don't want to lose some of the power that we could have by kind of spoiling it this season. Yeah.
So and I don't see any obstacles that we can't overcome to things like, Stephen H., I see your concern about travel, but it's not like everyone's just going to stay home. Yeah, there's a bigger chance of meeting raiding orcs at any time going across Beleriand in season 6 after the Dagor Bragollach, but it's not like no one's going to ever travel again, right? Finrod is not just going to stay in Nargothrond. He's not just going to hide out forever and never speak to anybody ever again, right? And he is totally capable. Is he capable of going across, between Nargothrond, which is fairly southerly, and Nogrod, which is also, going across into Osiriand and going north through Osiriand? Could he make that and live? Sure. It's not going to be that hard. Yeah, and Florian also points out, and this is a really good point, if we have Finrod essentially like paying off Arathel's desire for a Dwarven alliance this season, well, it won't pay off because Finrod is going to be saved by Barahir, not by the dwarves, right? We are not, in fact, going to be building towards any culmination of like, but thank goodness the dwarves of Nogrod had been brought into the into the picture. That's not gonna, we're not gonna pay that off in this season. And if anything, I would kind of rather not pay it off, because I would like to show that Arathel's hope for an alliance, her, like the way in which she sees her relationship with Eol as part of the larger, elvish story and the part of the siege of Angband, should come to nothing. I mean, it should fall to pieces with her marriage, right? And when she goes back to Gondolin, she is going back to Gondolin fleeing from her husband and knowing that like she did not succeed in doing what she had hoped to do. And all that she has left is just to try to protect her son. Like her one hope is to bring her son to Gondolin, right? So that at least his life can be protected and perhaps not corrupted by his father. And that, of course, is hideously tragic, right? That like her one hope is to bring Maegwyn to Gondolin, which is, of course, the biggest disaster of all. So yeah, Florian, exactly. We later on, right, when an effective alliance is established and the dwarves do come in and fight effectively during the Nirnaeth Arnuidiad, then we can kind of call back to Arathel's plan. This can be like the, somebody will remember that this was Arathel's vision, right? That happened. So yeah, that's cool. But see, like, all I'm hearing though with the Nauglamir is in this season is it's just like, and now a necklace randomly, right? Like it doesn't connect with anything in this season. I mean, I get it, like, yes, I get the Finrod as the anti-Eol, sure, but we're already establishing that in other ways. The Nauglamir doesn't accomplish anything. It doesn't mean anything in this, and he doesn't need it. Like he just needs it before he's dead, right? That's all. It just has to get to Nargothrond. That's all. It just has to be there. So that, because it's not going to be needed until Hurin picks it up, right? That's it. But see, Rhiannon, I don't even agree that we should be showing Finrod with it as long as possible. I disagree. It's not associated with Finrod. I mean, I know he commissioned it, but there is no story involving Finrod doing anything with the Nauglamir, apart from commissioning it, right? We know that, like, and the only reason it's connected with him is that he had all the bling, right? It's got to be in Nargothrond, but does he wear it? Does it do something? Again, there's no point. Like he has to, like his ring that he gives to Barahir, yeah, that's a big deal. And that needs to be a big deal in this season. But the Nauglamir, right? I mean, is he going to be wearing the Nauglamir in the Dagor Bragalach, right? And so what? So we have him be like, and so Barahir, my human rescuer, in thanks I shall give you my... No, actually, on second thought, I'll just give you my ring, right? It costs so much less. So I'm going to keep my necklace, or my circlet or my necklace for myself, right? This is mine, but you can have my ring, right? I mean, no, seriously, like there's no function. There's no story function to the Nauglamir anywhere in season 5. Again, I'm not saying that like I hate it, but why should we make a story? Look at all the story we've got. I mean, if there's one thing that jumps out at your eyes when you just scan your eyes over this page, it is this box, right? This is the box that stands out and is totally different from everything else and disconnected with anything else. It's the only box that's this color, right? That says to me, what is happening in that box is not essentially tied to the rest of the story. The Nauglamir has a story. Let's not confuse the story of the Nauglamir. The Nauglamir is the first step to the doom of Doriath. And I want it to be part of... I don't want to confuse it with other stories. Let us keep it being about Doriath, and therefore in season 6, the beginning of the downfall of Doriath season, not in season 5. So I feel pretty strongly about that. again, and I'm not anti-dwarf story. If we want to have another dwarf politics story, we want to introduce the distinction between Belagost and Nogrod, we can do that. I'm fine with having a dwarf story. I don't object to the color red here in general. I'm just saying, I don't like the Nauglamir in the middle of this season. I don't think it's necessary, and I don't think it's good. I think it's bad. If we made stories for it, we'd be making distracting and irrelevant stories that take away from its true story. How many different plot threads do you want this one necklace to be connected to? It has a role, right? And its role will be next season. Okay. So that's episode, which one were we at? This is 9? Yeah, 9. Ainur and Andreth, something dwarvish maybe, and Thurin-Gwethil vamping out with Anail. Which, by the way, Ainur and Andreth being juxtaposed with Thurin-Gwethil vamping out with Anail, really interestingly creepy. Kind of like that. Okay, episode 10. Yes, episode 10. Episode 10, Arathel, going back to the end of the Arathel plot, return to Gondolin, everybody dies. Well, not everybody, but, both of them die. The B plot is the bitterness of Andreth. The B plot is the Athrobeth itself, the conversation between Finrod and Andreth, discussing the differing fates of elves and men. That is fascinating. Okay. I'm wondering, could we switch? I would kind of like a gap between a little gap between the falling in love and the Athrobeth. Is it possible to bump the double wedding up to episode 10? Would that be possible? So, like, things are falling apart in Gondolin at the same time that the humans are all coming together, and Fingolfin has his warning vision. And then in episode 11, we have the Athrobeth. More time can have passed. Andreth can be a little older. I kind of want the romance with Ainur to be a little bit further in the rearview mirror by the time the Athrobeth happens. Also, I quite like the idea of the Athrobeth being the episode before the battle comes. To have, Finrod essentially going not straight from like the same day, you understand, but like going straight from his conversation with Andreth to, especially since like the topic of their discussion is death. I was talking about death the whole time, right? And what death means to their people, and what are the differing fates of elves and men, and then to go straight from that discussion of death and that big stuff to the battle in which lots of people die, right? Plus, it gives a little bit more. If the Athrobeth is the B plot, not of the Arathel story, but of the Fingolfin's big push A plot, then we have it feels a little bit more. I mean, what Finrod is, this is the point at which, in addition to talking about death, Finrod is also going to be explaining to Andreth, it's not that he wasn't into you, my brother, right? He can't, like literally he can't, like physically he can't marry you. Not because you're human even, right? It's not even that. It's because of what's happening right now, right? Like he's going to war, and elves don't do that, right? That's part of what he's explaining to her at the end of the Athrobeth. And if that happens, if we're cutting to that conversation from Fingolfin's big push, right, to attack Angband, it feels a little more present, right? We could even have Ainur in those discussions, essentially. Okay, so let's see. Nick is concerned about the the Barahir becoming the leader of the House of Baor thing, if the double wedding. Hang on, Nick. Hang on a second. I'm being dumb. I'm not following your objection here. Yeah. Hang on, Nick. Does Finrod have to get back to Nargothrond? Why does Finrod have to get back to Nargothrond? Can't he be up there in Dorthonion, hanging with Andrath? And then all he has to do is just get to the paths of Syrian in order to be ambushed, right? I don't think he doesn't have to get to Nargothrond and back, does he? Is there a reason he has to get to Nargothrond and back? Well, no, he doesn't have to bring troops from Nargothrond, but others can. I mean, he does have some other folks, right? Who else was there? Wasn't there another named elf we were introducing in Nargothrond? Who else do we have down there in Nargothrond? Yeah, Gwyndor. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, Gwyndor. Gwyndor and what's his face? Gwyndor in the future dismembered Gulin. That's it. That's his face. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Why not? Or he can bring them with him. Sure. Why not? Why not? Maybe because Fingolfin's doing his big push and we're talking about this, maybe he brings an army with him. Because something is happening and he knows that something is happening. So his army could be out, yeah. So he could have already so either one of those would work fine for me. Either he knows that something is afoot and he's been, and so he's coming up to support whatever Fingolfin wants to do. So he moves his people up to, he has that northern outpost anyway, right? Until Syrian, Minas Tirith. So he moves his army up to Minas Tirith. And then while his army's in Minas Tirith, he travels to Dorthonion to hang out with and to visit Andrath and stuff, right? That or again, he can bring an army up. I'm asking myself, why do we have to have, why does an army from Nargothrond have to be there? And my only answer is Gulin, Gwyndor's brother. We need to get him captured. But he can just be with Finrod. He could just be, Finrod presumably didn't travel alone, right? So he just needs to be one of the retainers that Finrod brought with him. Is there any other, is there a, also so they look less like jerks, Nick? Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah. Nick says, I'll have less of an aneurysm if he isn't moving his armies during a peacetime that he wants to maintain. Well, okay. Okay, that's fine. But he's got to have some people at Minas Tirith, right? Doesn't he have his B army at Minas Tirith? Surely. He didn't create that stronghold in order to leave it unmanned, right? So he can still look like not jerk and participate in the battle with some backup, right? Without having to bring all the Gondolindrim north necessarily. Yeah. Orodreth and Gilgalad are at Minas Tirith. Yep, sure. And again, presumably not by their lonesomes, right? They presumably have an army. There are, some folks right there, and Finrod could join them. They're affiliated with him, right? Yeah. Anyway, I'm not too worried about the military movements there as far as Finrod is concerned. Honestly, he would have to move, right? Even if he were sitting in Nargothrond with a telescope, right? Anticipating the coming of the Dagor Bragollach, for him to schlep his army north from Nargothrond after the battle has begun, It's possible, but it's still like that seems. He's going to still be late to the prom, I think, if he's doing that. So, yeah. Yeah, Florian, I agree. I don't see any reason why Finrod can't be wherever the heck we want him to be during almost any point of the later episodes. I agree. I don't think that there's so much restriction on Finrod's movements there. We can think through more the relationship between Fingolfin's big push and the Athrobeth. I can see, it's not that I can't see objections there. But do you see what I mean about wanting a gap? Like, this makes Andreth, how old would this make Andreth? I think like Marie is like in the middle of editing this live in the document but she'd be older. She'd be at least what, 40s? Maybe more. More would be nice. 50s? She calls herself a gray-haired, she didn't call herself a crone, but she calls herself a gray-haired old woman in the text of the Athrobeth, right? And again, I think that's there needs to be some time that has passed, right? This can't just be, I don't want the Athrobeth conversation just to be like, your brother left me the day before yesterday and I don't know how to cope, right? It's not that. It is like, I have been nursing a decade of bitterness since your brother left me a decade ago, right? It's a totally different tenor to the conversation. She's dealt with it. She has dealt with it. She's still bitter, but she's coped, right? She's at the age of 60. Now we're talking. 30 years after the romance. That's exactly it. Because it's too late for her. Now, again, that's the point. She's like, we've lost all these decades. Because when Finrod says, hey, like, elves don't do that, he could not have said yes to you. She's going to respond by saying, we had 30 years. If we could have just been together for 30 years and then he could have gone to war. Come on, right? She says that, right? So, yeah, I like it. 60, perfect. Yeah, good. So Rhiannon is suggesting, Nick, I think, suggested something like this too, moving the double wedding back to 11 and making it the B, or like the C plot. Yeah, the double wedding, it's not like there's a lot of story there. I mean, we can make something of it and stuff, but, yeah, as long as everybody's, married and born on time, we can kind of put that sort of wherever, I think. But by the way, I didn't comment on the fact that Fingolfin, the juxtaposition of Fingolfin's warning vision with like stuff going bad in Gondolin is kind of cool, right? Bad times are ahead, says Fingolfin as Eol's corpse is bouncing down the cliffside. Right? Yeah, I have a bad feeling about this, says Fingolfin as Maegwyn starts to like brood and stare at Idril. Yeah, no, I like that a lot. Okay, sure. Yeah, well, again, I'm willing to bow to the, like, again, obviously we have to get people married and born at the right time, but the Athrobeth at age 60, that I'm liking. And honestly, the double wedding, I'm not proposing this, but if the double wedding happened like off screen, I wouldn't cry bitter tears. I mean, I wouldn't. Like, if we just found out that it happened, I'm not saying if we can squeeze it in, great. I would love to do that. But I'm saying, to me, it's less important as an event, like as a plot event. It needs to have happened, but it doesn't. I mean, we can do cool things with it, not objecting to it at all. But I'm just saying, to me, I don't want that to determine, I don't want to either cramp the timeline, but nor do I want to, the Athrobeth is going to be unnatural in episode 10. Because again, if we're having an Andreth who's just on the rebound still, it's not the right tone. And the Athrobeth to me is 100 times more important than the double weddings as far as a plot event is concerned. Maybe 1,000 times more important to me than the double wedding. So I'm just saying as far as priorities are concerned. Yeah. And you're right, Florian. Hurin and Huor are the significant consequences of the double wedding. And they're going to be I mean, they're not going to be big features in this season. Certainly, they'll be on screen, but okay. Cool. Yes. All right. I'm keeping everybody super late tonight. I apologize for that really long episode, but this was awesome stuff here. We can come back and answer a few final questions about especially the Dagor Bragollach and how we bring that in and stuff. I want to talk about that, but I don't want to squeeze that into the last 20 seconds of the episode, of our session rather. So we'll start off with the last questions at the very end. Also give you guys some time to think up some more responses to some of the objections or suggestions that I've made here tonight. So we can finalize that next time. But in the meantime, we didn't get time to go over we can scan this next time. But questions for next time. Next time, we do want to get to the frame. So we hope to at least begin the discussion of the frame next time as well. I have 2 questions. So for those of you who have forgotten, it was several months ago. Those of you who are following live, we decided that the frame for this season is going to be Gandalf in Harad. Gandalf as in Canus, trying to help some of the Haradrim and to resist the recruitment officers of Sauron as he begins to work through Harad and begin his process there. So my 2 questions.
What a that was too.
What a what?
I remember that conversation. That was great. That's an all-time classic Silmarillion film project, like brainstorm right
Agreed. There. That is such a fantastic idea. I just love this idea. Absolutely. I'm still in love with the Gandalf and Harad idea. So my 2 questions about it are first, that I want people to be thinking about in preparation for our frame decisions. Do we want to focus on the Gandalf and Harad story just on the Haradrim, or do we want to involve folks from Gondor? When we were brainstorming it, we had some impulses about like him going back to Gondor and like talking to Faramir and stuff. Like, do we want to involve the Gondorians in this, or do we just want this to be just Gandalf in this village in Harad and just focusing on that? So that's my first question. Do we want to just focus on that, or do we want to bring in any of the Gondorian folks as well? My second question: how much of a failure and tragedy do we want the story to be? Do we want this to be like the story of a small success? Do we want this to be a complete tragedy? Does Gandalf leave and everyone's dead behind him, like everyone's dead and or converted to the worship of Sauron? What endpoint are we going for in this? Because I can see a really tragic ending to this story. I could see a small victory, right? I could see. We could make it a kind of happy ending, right? We could give this as an example of, if not for the effort of this is what the Blue Wizards are doing full time, right out there in the east and south. And if not for their efforts, the armies of Sauron would have been twice as big as they were, kind of thing, right? And we could show a glimpse of that with Gandalf here. So we could make it a happy story. We could make it a complete tragedy. We could put it somewhere in the middle. I think we were leaning towards tragedy last in our initial brainstorming. But anyway, those are the 2 big things, I think. If we can agree on those things, we can figure out the rest of the details. So, all right. Thanks, everybody, for all of your wonderful contributions tonight, and thanks for all of the work that everybody's been continuing to do. This has been such a fun season. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you, Marie, for preparing all those wonderful things, all those wonderful visuals for our discussion here today. We'll come back to the family trees next time, as well as finishing up those last few episodes. So I will say, as always, thanks for listening and Godspeed.
Although the theoretical budget of our hypothetical blockbuster may be unlimited, the production budgets of this and the rest of our fun alternative educational projects are unfortunately not. If you have enjoyed joining our production team, please consider donating at signumuniversity.org/fund.